All right, college football season's just about to start, so let's do the full SEC football predictions for 2024. Power ranking every team in the SEC for 2024. The first tier we have below average to bad. Coming at 16, 15, and 14 are Vanderbilt, Mississippi State, and Arkansas. In a vacuum, I don't think any of these teams are 6-win teams, which is why they're in the below average or bad tier. And then coming in after them is the solid bowl team. They're 13, 12, and 11. I've got South Carolina, Auburn, and Florida. In a vacuum against a generic schedule, I would say these teams are about a 6-7 win team. I think each of them has talent, but maybe not the depth of talent I like to see out of what I would consider a top 25 caliber team, which is why I put them just below the teams that you're going to see coming up next. And that is coming at 10 through 5. So I have Kentucky at 10. I think they brought in some good transfers that I'll talk more about later that would have them at least bordering a top 25 team for me. Then A&M, you bring in a new coach. The roster is still very talented. LSU, another team very talented, recruits very well, but you lose a lot to the NFL. They got Tennessee, another very talented team, bringing in a new quarterback. Got a lot of upside there. Then I've got Missouri at 6, bringing pretty much everything back offensively, but you lose a lot of defensive pieces. And then Oklahoma coming in from the Big 12, like their quarterback, like their wide receiver group. I think they're underrated. And then finally, 4 through 1 for contenders. These are contenders not only to win the SEC, but I think to win a national championship. I have Ole Miss at 4 just because I still question how much the transfers will help defensively. Will it be an average defense? Will it be a really good defense? What will the impact be? And then third, I have Texas. I had them second. I do think losing 2 running backs already, that was enough for me to move them down to third. Then I have Alabama second, bringing in Kalen DeBoer to replace Nick Saban. Jalen Milroe's back, still probably the most talented team in all of college football based on recruiting. And then number 1, Kirby Smart in Georgia, just the current powerhouse of college football and the best program right now in college football. So now let's get into my team-by-team predictions. Last year, the Vanderbilt Commodores were very disappointing, failed to win any SEC games. So let's see if they can perform better this year. I think the strengths come in their staff upgrades, with Clark Lea making some big changes, and they brought him some decent portal additions. I think the weaknesses are in talent. This is the worst recruiting team in the SEC, and I don't like their skill positions, losing some of their best players in the portal. So now getting into the schedule, you open up against Virginia Tech. You are at home here, but I think Virginia Tech with Kyron Jones, just a better team. I think Vanderbilt's really going to struggle here. I think you lose. Then you're playing Alcorn State up next. Don't know a whole lot about Alcorn State. I think they're pretty solid in the division they play in. But Vanderbilt's still an SEC team. I still expect them to win. Then Georgia State, I think, could definitely be tricky. I do think Vanderbilt's good enough to go on the road and get a win here, but don't think they're nearly good enough to beat Missouri, who is preseason number 11. I think you lose. Then you get your bye week before playing Alabama. Could get ugly, could get really ugly. I think it's a loss. Then you go on the road to Kentucky, who I said I think is a borderline top 25 team. I think it's a loss. But then you get a home game against Ball State. I think it's a win for Vanderbilt. And now you're 3-4. And now you got to go play. Well, you get it at home when you're playing Texas, but Texas, one of the best teams in the country. Vanderbilt's going to lose here. They're playing on the road at Auburn. Think you lose here as well. But here, I think Vanderbilt's actually going to get their first SEC win in at least 2 years. Oh, beating South Carolina. Vanderbilt could definitely lose all their games in SEC this year. But full disclosure, my dad went to Vanderbilt, so I root for him a little bit. I think they're gonna get one SEC win this year. I was looking for a spot for it. I think they can maybe get a home win at South Carolina. Then coming off the bye, I don't think they can beat LSU, and I think Tennessee is too good as well. In the SEC, Vanderbilt's just at a serious talent deficit against almost every team they play. I think they finish the season 4-8. Disappointing for sure, but you do get at least one SEC win, which is an improvement. After 5-7 season, there's a lot of change coming to Starkville, Mississippi. So let's do the full predictions for Mississippi State. I think the strengths of this team are in their skill positions, mainly at tight end, bringing in Seydou Traore out of the portal. I think he's a very good tight end that'll help this offense. And then I think coaching offensively is a strength with Jeff Levy coming in, formerly of Ole Miss and then Oklahoma. I think he's a really good offensive coach. And I think he'll help the offense for Mississippi State out a lot. They also have Blake Shapen at quarterback transferring in, which reports out of Springer that he looks pretty good. I'm not fully sold that he's going to be great for you this year, but if you're high on Mississippi State, he's given reason to believe so far. The weaknesses, I put defensive experience. You only bring 2 starters back, but on the bright side, the defense was really bad last year, allowing about 30 points per game. So new faces could actually improve the defense. And then the offensive line is bringing in mostly portal players to solidify it, which I think there's always a risk there that they just don't gel. And the offensive line's got to be able to play as like one collective unit. So getting into the game-by-game predictions, I think Mississippi State should easily beat Eastern Kentucky in a home game. And then they go on the road to Tempe to play Arizona State. I might actually go to this game, but I think Mississippi State, I think the caliber of athlete is still too physical. Even though they're one of the worst teams in the SEC, I think they're too physical of an opponent for ASU, who was barely able to fill an offensive line last year. And then Toledo at home, Mississippi State should win. Before pretty big game against Florida. Florida's going to have Graham Mertz, or maybe DJ Lagway's gotten the job. Who knows? But most likely Graham Mertz. Florida's got pretty good O-line, pretty good athletes there. This is a home game, so Mississippi State could definitely win it. But I think Florida a little bit better. I think Florida's going to get the win, and I think he also loses to Texas. I think Texas's offensive firepower is I think they're going to put up a lot of points against Mississippi State. The O-line's really good, and they have pretty dynamic receivers as well. And I don't think Blake Shapen's going to be able to make a bunch of plays against the Texas defense to keep up. Then off a bye week on the road against Georgia. Georgia, probably the best team in the country, at least one of the handful of teams in discussion. Pretty obvious. Road games against teams that good, it goes without saying you're most likely going to lose. Then you get a home game against Texas A&M. This is a spot I think Mississippi State could win, pull an upset. But I think with Connor Wigman and the improved coaching at A&M, bringing in Mike Elko from Duke, and still a very talented roster, I think they're better than Mississippi State and win even on the road. But then a home game against Arkansas, one of the teams I think is on a similar level to Mississippi State with the home field. I think you snap a 4-game losing streak and get a win. Moving on to UMass. UMass, not a good team at all. Mississippi State should win. And now actually have a winning record at 5-4, just 3 games left to see if you can get into a bowl game. Go on the road against Tennessee, who I think is one of the better teams in the SEC this year. Nico at this point of the season I expect really, really good. I expect the offense to be one of the best in the country by this time. And then I think defensively they got some players that could give Mississippi State some problems. I don't see Mississippi State winning on the road in Knoxville. Now you get your bye week. Kind of brutal. I guess the Arkansas UMass stretch isn't the worst, but I would have liked to get a bye week before these last 2 games. But it does set you up to be refreshed as much as you can be late in the year against Missouri, who I think is really, really good. And I think Missouri's a team that's going to really expose Mississippi State's defensive issues. I'm sure they'll improve over the course of the year, but Missouri's offense I think is one of the best in the country. And I think Mississippi State's defense, even by the end of the year, is not going to be equipped to stop them. And even with Missouri losing some defensive players, their defense you would think would improve over the course of the year. And they brought in, 5-star true freshmen and big-time transfers at corner. So I think Mississippi State's going to lose this. And then a Friday game against your rival, Ole Miss, who's preseason number 6. I think you lose that as well. I think you finish 5-7. Same as last year. Probably disappointing, but I think you got to give some time for Jeff Lebby to get his guys in there, his recruits, improve the level of talent at Mississippi State, and maybe be a better team in the future. After a 4-8 season, Sam Pittman's on the hot seat for the Arkansas Razorbacks, and this is a make-or-break season in 2024. Let's see what they can do. So the strengths of this roster, I think potentially in your quarterback, bringing in Taylon Green from Boise State to replace KJ Jefferson, who transferred out to UCF. I've only seen Green play twice, but what he showed in those 2 games is he's very athletic, mobile guy, and high upside. But what's the case with a lot of these athletic quarterbacks? They look like there's questions throwing the ball. So I think there's upside at quarterback. Probably have some really good games. Probably have some games where he's not able to help out moving the ball too well through the air. And then another strength is edge rush, with Landon Jackson being one of the best edge rushers in the country. And then weaknesses, kind of surprisingly for Arkansas, I would say because Sam Pittman is your head coach, the offensive line, which kind of his calling card, was not very good last year, and it doesn't look like it should improve this year. And then overall talent, compared to the rest of the teams in the SEC, Arkansas just doesn't really stack up talent-wise against them. So they would have to get advantages somewhere else to win against a lot of these teams. Getting into the game-by-game prediction, you open up against UAPB, who, to be honest with, I've never heard of, but I think you win. And then after that, you're going to have a road game against Oklahoma State, who I think running the ball with that O-line, Oklahoma State having Ollie Gordon and I believe all 5 starters returning on the O-line, I think they're going to move the ball on the ground pretty effectively against Arkansas. It's in Stillwater. I think Arkansas is probably still, or Taylor Green's probably still working out, trying to figure out the system and improve as a quarterback at this point. I don't think they're ready to beat Oklahoma State, who's probably a top 25 team. I do think they beat UAB. UAB's actually should be pretty good this year, but I think Arkansas at home should be able to get the win here. Next up, you're gonna have a road game against Auburn. Auburn is improving, especially talent-wise. They've been really on fire recruiting for next year, and we're pretty good recruiting for this cycle as well. Peyton Thorne there at quarterback, I don't think it's the best, but at home, I think they're able to beat Arkansas. So Arkansas is now 2-2 going to the Southwest Classic against A&M, a neutral site game. And then neutral site game, I'm going to tend to just pick who I think's better. Just better because it's neutral site, not really any travel, or the travel's involved for both teams. So whoever's the better team should win this game. And I do think Texas A&M's the better team. I think they have better athletes, which is usually the case. I think they're better at quarterback. I think they've got really good players defensively, and that D-line I think is going to cause some serious problems for Arkansas. Having Nick Scourton and Shamar Stewart there, I think could cause a lot of pressure, and Taylor Green can make a lot of mistakes. Next, you're going to have a home game against Tennessee, who I think should be pretty good this year, and one of the better teams in the SEC with Nico at quarterback. I think Arkansas can keep it relatively competitive, but I think Tennessee under Josh Heupel is just going to put up too many points, and I do think you lose this game to Tennessee. And then you're able to get your first bye week before a home game against LSU. I actually like this bye week spot quite a bit because I think you're coming off 2, maybe or 3 straight losses and pretty tough schedule so far, and I like this bye week to get a scheduling advantage against LSU, who doesn't have a very good defense, in my opinion, and I think this could be a game that Taylor Green plays really well in, probably one of his better games of the season, in my opinion, and then I think you'll also be able to run the ball pretty well with Jaquindon Jackson here. And I think you'll put up enough points to stay in this game against LSU. I think it'll be close. And I think a couple plays go your way. Then you pull an upset here. And you get your 3rd win of the season. Don't think you beat Mississippi State. I think home game for Mississippi State, a team on a similar level as Arkansas, is going to result in Arkansas losing this game. Next up, you're going to have a home game against Ole Miss, who I think's just too talented. There's a different level of team than Arkansas this year. Too good at receiver, better at quarterback, should be able to run the ball well, improve defensively. I think this is a loss. You get a bye week before playing Texas, another team that's just a different caliber of team than Arkansas. That O-line, I think, is going to be they're just going to be able to move the ball on the ground at will. The receivers, I think, are too good for Arkansas secondary, and I don't think Arkansas is equipped to perform well against the Texas defense. Do think you get your fourth win of the season here against Louisiana Tech to finish 3-1 in non-conference, but I think you lose to end the year against Missouri, another team too good at receiver, too good at quarterback, should be able to run the ball, put up too many points where Arkansas's offense just not equipped to get into shootouts, in my opinion, and you finish the season 4-8, and Sam Pittman might be looking at a new job. After an 8-5 season in 2022, South Carolina had a very disappointing 2023 season, failing to make a bowl game, and they'll look to bounce back in 2024 and get back to their winning ways under Shane Beamer. I think the strengths of this team are in their quarterback upside and their running back. They bring in Raheem Sanders from Arkansas, or Rocket Sanders, I guess he goes by, who's a 1,000-yard rusher, really good running back. And then Lenore Sellers is a sophomore quarterback who didn't play last year, but he's a pretty highly recruited guy, really talented. And I think just, it's his first year starting, so I don't think you can say quarterback's for sure strength, but I think he definitely has the talent and upside to be one of the better quarterbacks in the country, and gives you upside at that position. I think weaknesses, I don't think the O-line is very good, which could cause serious problems in the SEC, who has a lot of good defensive lines. And then I put depth of talent here, and this, not to be confused with talent, because I think some of South Carolina, like the top guys on South Carolina, are just as good as some of the top guys at the best schools in the country. You bring in 5-star freshmen like Dylan Stewart on the edge. Gilbert Edmond transfers back, also on the edge. Nicholas Harbor, just a freak athlete. But I think when you go after, the starting 22, I don't think it's nearly as good as a lot of the top teams. And in football, when you're going to need depth, I think that could hurt South Carolina. But getting into the schedule prediction, I think they should easily beat Old Dominion. Not a team where they have to worry about talent at all. And I think it's a good opening game to kind of have Lenore Sellers get his feet wet, and just kind of see what the team's going to look like before going on the road to Lexington to face Kentucky, who's also going to be starting a new quarterback in Brock Vandegrift. I think Kentucky's a little bit better of a team than South Carolina. I think if you look at the transfers they're bringing in, even defensively, and then you're going to have Barry and Brown at wide receiver, and then the home field advantage, I think they're able to defeat South Carolina. And this before you have a home game against LSU. I was really close to picking South Carolina pull the upset here, but ultimately I went with LSU to get the win. I think it's probably a shootout here because I don't trust LSU's defense, so I think Lenore Sellers can have a big game. The South Carolina offense can put up points, but I also think LSU's offense will still be really good, and I think it'll be a tight game, but LSU will just barely win. You could definitely talk me into South Carolina getting this one. It's really close in my mind. I'm confident they will beat Akron before their bye week. And then another game where I was really, really close to picking South Carolina, a home game off a bye against Ole Miss. But ultimately, I think Ole Miss is just too good of a team this year. Preseason top 10 for sure. I think number 6. And I think they're too good to lose to South Carolina, who I don't think is even really a top 25 caliber team. Like I said, I was close to picking the upset. Unexpected things are going to happen. But ultimately, I think Ole Miss is able to win this game. Then I think you lose a road game to Alabama. I think Alabama is a top team this year in the country, threat to win the national title, home field advantage, all the talent they have. Pretty much, I think it's pretty self-explanatory why I'm picking Alabama here. Also think you lose on the road against Oklahoma, who's going to put up a lot of points, I think, with Jackson Arnold. And the wide receiver core with Deion Burks, Nick Anderson, Jaleel Farouk, Andrew Anthony, I think should be healthy, and another weapon they have. I think too many points are going to come from Oklahoma. Now you get your second bye week. You're 2-5. You're going to need to go 4-1 if you're going to get to a bowl game here. And I think you start off good. I think you're able to beat Texas A&M off a bye at home. I think it's a good scheduling position for you. I don't think Texas A&M is too much of a better team than South Carolina. So I do think they win. But unfortunately, I'd be getting upset by Vanderbilt, which South Carolina fans probably going to be very mad about. If you want, you can switch. You can lose to A&M, beat Vanderbilt. Or, like I'm rooting for Vanderbilt. So I wanted them to get one SEC win this year. Unfortunately, I think it's against South Carolina. But it's very realistic that South Carolina wins this game. And then, if you're happier, I did think you upset Missouri. I think Missouri, really good team, can put up points as well. A lot like Oklahoma, but this time you're at home and you've kind of been improving throughout the year and are better prepared for the explosive offenses after playing a few of them. I think you're able to hold Missouri in check enough to pull the upset. And I think you also beat Wofford and are now at 5-6, needing to beat your rival Clemson to make it to a bowl game. Don't think you do. I think Clemson's defense is going to be one of the better ones you face all year, even playing through a whole SEC schedule. And I don't think Lenore Sellers is going to have a great game here. And I think Clemson's going to beat you. And South Carolina will finish 5-7. Pretty disappointing year. But I just want to mention, I could easily see the Vanderbilt, the LSU game going another way, and South Carolina finishing at 6-6. Thanks. Really very realistic, and would be a much better season being able to make a bowl game. Auburn was a solid 6-6 team in Hugh Freeze's first year. Let's see if they can improve in 2024. I think the strengths of this team are in the improving roster and in the run game. I think the roster is improving through recruiting and also some good transfer portal additions. I think Keandre Lambert-Smith coming in at wide receiver helps, and then Cam Coleman, a true freshman wide receiver. I think the skill positions upgrade a lot. Quarterback, still a weakness in my opinion with Peyton Thorne. He is mobile, so he gives you a bit of a run threat, and that's why the run game is also a strength, because you're going to have your running backs to deal with and then also Thorne. But I think he really hurts in the passing game. And then in terms of defensive experience, you're losing 7 starters and not a lot of proven production on the defensive side of the ball, but there are definitely talented guys that give Auburn a chance to be solid defensively. Getting into the schedule predictions, I think you beat Alabama A&M. Too much of a talent advantage for Auburn, and at home, you should beat them. And then at Cal, I think at home. So Cal's coming to Auburn, pretty long trip, and I think Auburn at this point, I know it was a close game last year. I think it's a much more talented team than Cal, and gets another win, and does the same against New Mexico. First 3 games, pretty easy, relatively speaking, especially compared to what they'll likely have to face in the SEC. And I think you get off to a 3-0 start. Then when you play Arkansas, I think you win there. I think Arkansas is one of the bottom teams in the SEC this year. Auburn's at home. I think you should win. Then this is one of probably the toughest or second toughest game for me to pick on this whole schedule. And I end up giving Oklahoma the win here. Just because I don't think Auburn's defensive line is going to fully expose Oklahoma's offensive line, which I think is their biggest weakness. And then I think Oklahoma's wide receiver core is going to put up big numbers against Auburn's secondary. And then I think their defense is pretty underrated, and I think Auburn is not going to be able to score enough points. I think they'll keep it close, but I think I'm like 60% Oklahoma, 40% Auburn here. And the home field, it's Jordan Hare Stadium, it's a very tough place to play, which is almost wanting me to pick Auburn, but I do think Oklahoma's the better team. That's why I went them. Then I think at Georgia is clearly a loss. Georgia, too talented, better quarterback, better running back, good wide receivers, better O-line, better defensive players, better depth of talent, just better across the board, home field advantage. I mean, there's a reason Georgia's won 2 of the last 3 national championships, and they're preseason number 1 again. They're going to beat Auburn. Then I think you lose off your bye week on the road at Missouri. I think Missouri's a team with a lot of offensive firepower that Auburn, I think teams that put up a lot of points, Auburn can struggle to keep up with, because I think you're going to have to ask Peyton Thorne to put the ball in the air more, and I don't know that he's good enough to do so, even with improved weapons on the perimeter. Then you go on the road to Lexington. Road games in the SEC, really tough. Oh, we gave it away. I think you beat Vanderbilt. But let me talk about Kentucky. Road games in the SEC are really tough against Kentucky. I think a similar caliber of opponent. I think it's got to be pretty good defensively. I think it's a low-scoring game. Probably comes down to a turnover or something, and ultimately I just wanted to go home field was the tiebreaker. Then off a bye, well, I guess I have you beating Vanderbilt. I think you're better than Vanderbilt and at home. Vanderbilt, not a very good team, unfortunately. Then off a bye, should beat Louisiana Monroe to get to 6-4 and have bowl eligibility with just 2 games left. This was the other game that was in contention for toughest game for me to pick, just because I think A&M, I think, is a better team, and I like their quarterback a lot, and I think they're a little more talented than Auburn, even with Auburn's improving roster. But the thing is, Auburn at home makes me want to lean Auburn. It's kind of the same situation with Oklahoma, where I think Auburn's not the better team, but them being at home makes me always want to pick them. But unfortunately, I did go with Texas A&M winning. And then the Iron Bowl, who knows? Weird things happen in the Iron Bowl. You had the kick six. You had Jalen Milroe's miracle last year. So, crazy things can happen. But Alabama being at home, and I think they're a better team, I got to go with them. So losing your last 2 games is a little disappointing. Still go 6-6. But I still think Auburn's clearly getting better. And I think they could definitely get a win against either Oklahoma or A&M and be 7-5, and then you're looking at a pretty good season. So this is a little bit, I guess, more pessimistic view of how their season will turn out. But if I'm an Auburn fan, I think 8-4 is definitely reasonable. 7-5, maybe what you expect. I'm just a little bit more pessimistic when I look at this schedule. But still a fine season. You make a bowl game, and the program's clearly getting better with how good the recruiting is. So nothing to be too worried about. Kentucky's been a consistently overachieving program under Mark Stoops, and let's see if they can continue that trend in 2024. The strengths of this team come in their impact transfers, namely Brock Vandegrift at quarterback, former 5-star recruit from Georgia, Chip Trayanum, a running back coming in from Ohio State, obviously very talented, and then also Jamon Dumas Johnson coming in at linebacker, right? Which is why the linebacker group is a major strength. Already had De'Aaron Jackson there, who was really good last year. And then you also have Deion Walker is going to be on the defensive front, and then J.J. Weaver also in the linebacker group. So linebackers could be could be close to the best of the SEC, which is weird to say from Kentucky, but it definitely could be. And then didn't put this on strengths, but Deion Walker, probably a top 10 projected pick right now. Really, really good at defense. So he's just an impact player. I think the weaknesses are in the secondary, just because the pass defense wasn't very good last year. And although it seems like you have talented players and they're coming back, but it didn't really work out last year. But it could improve. I think the talent's there. And then overall talent, I would say, is a weakness just because of Kentucky's level of recruiting compared to the rest of the teams in the SEC. Getting into the schedule prediction, I think you beat Southern Miss, who I don't think is very good. And then I think you also beat South Carolina. Lenore Sellers at this point still going to be really new. I don't think he's going to be at his best yet this season, which gives Kentucky an edge. And then I think the home field advantage is going to allow Kentucky to get a decently hard-fought win against South Carolina. I think you lose to Georgia, even at home. I don't think Kentucky I think to beat Georgia, Josh Pate talks about this a lot for anyone who watches Late Kick. He talks about like the freeze point. So unless you catch Georgia like sleeping, you're gonna have to have a certain caliber of roster to pull an upset. And I think at this point in the season, Georgia is not gonna be caught in a trap game yet. So Kentucky would have to just outplay them, which I don't think is realistic. Do think they beat Ohio, and then I think you lose on the road against Mississippi. Even with the big time transfers coming in, you have Barian Brown at wide receiver. He's very good. I think Ole Miss ultimately is going to have too much firepower, especially against a secondary that wasn't great in pass defense last year. And with the receivers Ole Miss has in Harris, Watkins, Juice Wells, and Pierce scoring even at tight ends very good. I think too much of a passing attack, which will also, which will just cause Kentucky's defense a lot of problems, and then even open up the run game more. Which if they were better in the secondary wouldn't be there for Ole Miss as much. But I think it'll cause too much problems, and you're in Oxford, so I think you lose. You get a bye here before probably your easiest conference game of the season against Vanderbilt. I think you win here and prove to 4-2. Pretty solid start to the season. But then you go up to Gainesville. For anyone who's looked at Florida's schedule, it's absolutely brutal. This is one of the games they're going to have to win to have any hope of being successful this season. And I think they know that. So I think they beat Kentucky. But I think Kentucky bounces back at home with a win against Auburn. I think Auburn and Kentucky, pretty evenly matched teams. Ultimately, at home, I think Kentucky can get a win. And then I think you lose it in Knoxville. Tennessee, another team with a lot of offensive firepower. And at home here, another team I think Kentucky could just struggle to keep up with. Then you get your final bye week of the year before playing Murray State, a team I fully expect Kentucky to beat. And then you play maybe your toughest game of the season, right up there with Georgia and Ole Miss, on the road at Texas. Another really high-powered offense. You've got good receivers, really good offensive line that I think is going to kind of negate some of Kentucky's strongest points on or the strongest player on defense, at least in Deion Walker, because Texas O-line is so good. And then I also think Texas's defense would be pretty effective in stopping Kentucky. I think you lose at Texas. And then you have your rivalry game against Louisville. It is at home. I think it's kind of 50-50 game. I think it'd be really close. Past couple years, I thought Louisville would win. Kentucky ended up doing it. I think I'm going to go Louisville again. I think they're bound to get one. Kentucky fans, I'm sorry, but I do think Louisville's going to – I think they've lost at least 2 in a row. I think they're going to break that streak. Yeah, so last year, Louisville, even when they were seemingly a much better team than Kentucky, was still defeated. And they lost the year before that as well. Don't know about further than that, but I think Louisville's able to break their losing streak, and I think Kentucky ends up going 6-6 because of it. It's a make or break year in Gainesville for Florida coach Billy Napier. I think they're going to have to get at least 6 wins for him to keep his job, and with this schedule, it's going to be tough to do. Let's get into it. The strengths of this team, I think, are in quarterback, not only with returning starter Graham Mertz, who I think was really good last year. He's very efficient and I thought really accurate. Not like a top quarterback. Like, he's not going to go really above the X's and O's, but he's a really good like game manager, solid quarterback, and I think it's a strength of his team. But not only him, true freshman DJ Lagway, really, really good according to all reports. I think he was number 1 quarterback recruit, depending on where you look, him and Dylan Raiola. But so I think there's also a chance at some point, well, I think he'll definitely get used at some point. Probably won't be a starter, but I think he's really good and can make some impact plays. And I think the O-line, according to Pro Football Focus, graded very highly and should be, with a lot of players returning, should be one of the strengths of the offense. Weaknesses, I think, are in your defense. Because you lose a lot of talent, and even what's coming back, the defense wasn't great last year. It's just kind of, there's not like a specific part that I thought was like, oh, this is the clear weakness of the defense, but as a collective unit, it wasn't as good as I think Florida expects their defenses to be. And then really the biggest weakness for Florida this year, because I think they have a pretty solid team, but it's the schedule. If you just look at these last 5 games, which we'll get into, probably the hardest 5-game stretch maybe ever. I mean, it's really, really, really hard. And then let's just get into the schedule. You open up with Miami, who I have as a preseason, and I mean, they're ranked 19, but if I were to rank them, probably a preseason top 10 team in my mind with Cam Ward going over there. I don't think Florida's on that level, and I think they lose to Miami. I do think you beat Samford, so you're 1-1 start, but I think going to that Miami game a little bit more, I think Miami's going to be pretty explosive on offense. I think they're good in every phase. I think Cam Ward is a threat with his legs. He's a threat throwing. I think the O-line is really good in pass protection and run blocking, which is going to allow Damian Martinez, a good running back, to have a really good year. And I think they have one of the more underrated wide receiver rooms in the country. And I think they're just a really, really good team this year that I don't think Florida is going to be able to beat. Like I said, I think they beat Samford. And I do think you win a home game against A&M. But even this 3-game start to the schedule, A&M, like this is one of the more winnable games for Florida this year. And A&M's a really good team with Mike Elko coming in and all the talent that's on that roster. But I think Florida is a good team, and I think they're going to have to get off to a pretty good start to survive the stretch at the end of the year. So this is a win I think they're going to get. I also think they're going to win on the road in Starkville. I think Mississippi State's one of the worst teams in the SEC this year. Even with Jeff Levy coming in and the transfers bring in, I think Florida, better team and can win a road game here. Then you get a bye week. So you got a 3-1 start, and then you play in-state. Probably not a rival, but I don't know. You can let me know if this is a rivalry game to Florida or UCF fans. But in-state opponent UCF, who's going to have a really good run game, bringing in Penny Boone and already having Harvey, and then KJ Jefferson comes in. But I think even with UCF's improving roster and use of the transfer portal, Florida recruits, they still recruit really well. And I think it'll show because their caliber of players just higher level, in my opinion. I think Florida wins, get up to 4-1, or improve to 4-1. Don't think you beat Tennessee, though, who I think at this midpoint of the season is really getting into a groove. I think Nico's going to do really well against this Florida defense. And I think Tennessee's defensive players defense is improving at this point of the season as well. On the road as well for Florida, just a really tough game overall. Don't think you win it, but I do think you beat Kentucky because I think you're more talented than Kentucky and you're at home. And I think a lot of your issues at this point in the year, I think you've improved upon, and I think you're able to win a home game against a similar level of opponent. So now you got 5-2 start before this 5-game stretch, which I was talking about earlier. So you're going to have to win at least one of these 5 games to make a bowl. And you would think at this point of the season, Billy Napier, the hot seat talk has probably died down a little bit, but it could start up really easily. Because coming off a bye, neutral site against Georgia, I think you lose. I think Georgia's, I would rank them as probably the best team in the country coming into the year. Even if they're not that, they're up there. And at neutral site, don't think this team's not ready to beat Georgia. Then after Georgia, you're probably physically beat down. The team, it would be better if you had a easier game after this. But no, you got to go on the road to Austin against maybe a team even better than Georgia, at least in that same tier. And now you're even more worn out against Texas. And now you go from 5-2, you're 5-4. Still 3 really tough games remain. But I think Florida is able to get a really, really big win at home against LSU because I think the other 2 teams are really physical. And LSU, I'm skeptical is going to have that level of physicality this year. I think their offense isn't going to be quite as good, and I think their defense is still pretty bad. So I'm not as high as LSU I'm probably lower on LSU than anybody this year, and I think Florida can win it. If I was as high on LSU as everybody else, then I think this 5-game stretch would probably be the hardest ever. But this is the one where I don't see it at being as difficult as the other 4 games. But then I think you get right back to, extremely difficult games, losing to Ole Miss with all the firepower Ole Miss has, with Jackson Dart back, with the improving defense, Walter Nolan there, Princely Umayan. I think that's how you say his name. Sorry if I got it wrong. I think you lose to Ole Miss. Then you got a road game against Florida State, rivalry weekend. People always say anything can happen on rivalry week, but Florida State, they're the better team here. They're preseason top 10. Even if that's a little high, they're still, I think, clearly a better team than Florida. And when you combine all that with this stretch of games, Florida's going to be probably beat up. The players are exhausted. Probably got a lot of injuries after this. You've probably given everything you had to this season so far in this last stretch. I think they're just gassed, and I don't think they have anything left in the tank. So I think you're going to lose to Florida State and finish 6-6. So you still get to bowl game. Not a complete failure of a season. I think Florida fans probably disappointed because most of your big games, I got you losing to your 2 or 3 biggest rivals probably in Florida State, Georgia, and Miami. Then I also think you lose Texas and Ole Miss and Tennessee, who's another one of your big rivals. So LSU and A&M, though, I think are pretty big wins for Florida. And I don't think, with as difficult as this schedule is, I don't think it's the worst thing that could happen. I think 5-7 could definitely happen, even maybe 4-8. Texas A&M brings in new coach Mike Elko to help improve on what's been a pretty disappointing stretch of seasons for Texas A&M. What the Jimbo Fisher era, although they always were at the top of recruiting, could never get the on-field results that they liked. So going a little bit deeper, the strengths of this team are on the defensive front. You got Shamar Turner there, Shamar Stewart there, DJ Hicks. You bring in Purdue transfer Nick Scourton. Probably the best defensive front in the SEC. Obviously, there's a lot of really good defensive fronts. Georgia and Alabama always have elite talent there. But A&M probably has the best one. And then quarterback upside, I think, is a real strength of this team. I think Connor Wigman was probably under the radar because of how much time he missed last year. But I think he's one of the more talented quarterbacks in the country and has the upside, therefore, to be one of the best quarterbacks in the country. Not saying he is, but I think the upside gives Texas A&M fans at least hope and potential for a really good season. Then I think your weaknesses are potentially in the secondary. Bring in a lot of transfers. Des Riggs from Alabama, Kansas State transfer as well. So we'll see if they're able to figure it out. And then I said offensive firepower because although I think Wigman's good, you lose Evan Stewart at receiver, who is one of your better receivers. Aniyah Smith is gone. You do have Moose Muhammad, who's solid, but then you lose Reuben Owens, who I think was going to be your lead running back, or was expected to be your lead running back. So I think the offensive firepower is not as good as you would like it. I think so getting into the game-by-game predictions, you open up at home against Notre Dame. I think Notre Dame is a really good team this year, but I think their biggest weakness is actually on the O-line. I think they might improve throughout the year, but to open up in Kyle Field against what I think's one of the best defensive fronts in the country, I think is a recipe for disaster for Notre Dame. And I think A&M is going to start off with a really big win against the Fighting Irish. I then think you easily beat McNeese, but I think you lose to Florida. Unfortunately, I think Florida is a team that's, they're going to win some games, and there's not that many winnable games on their schedule. So this is one of the ones that's gettable for them, and I think they're going to win it. Bowling Green, then, I think you clearly beat. And then you have a neutral site game in the Southwest Classic against Arkansas, which I think should be a win for you. I think your defensive front will be really disruptive against an Arkansas O-line, which could be a weak point for them. And then I think that'll give Taylen Green problems for Arkansas, and I don't think Arkansas has the ability to cause as much disruption for Wigman and A&M. I then think you lose to Missouri because I think Missouri's going to, even against a pretty good defensive front, I think the O-line should hold up at least pretty well. And then I think this is the best passing game this A&M secondary will have faced so far with Burden, Mookie Cooper, Theo Wiesback, and some more freshmen coming in. I think it's a really good wide receiving core that the secondary isn't going to be or isn't going to do very well against. And I think that'll lead to Missouri winning the game. Off a bye, though, I think it's a pretty good spot for a bye because you had played 6 straight games. And if you were playing a 7th on the road, I might have taken Mississippi State. But because of the bye, I think A&M's able to prepare well for this game. And I think they're a better team. I think they win. You got a home game against LSU. Pretty tough game to pick. I would say it's like relatively 50-50. I think LSU has a lot of firepower that could test the A&M defense, but I don't think they have the defense to really stop. Even with A&M's limited firepower, they should perform pretty well against LSU defense. At home, maybe a night game in Kyle Field. I don't know. It's really tough to pick, but I'm going with A&M to get the win. Ultimately, it was just it was more of a home field advantage thing. And then you go on the road to South Carolina, which I think you actually lose. This was another tough one to pick. These basically, I just didn't think they would go 3-0 off the bye. I felt like there was a loss in there somewhere. Maybe it's LSU, but I was leaning more towards South Carolina. Maybe it's just a big Lenore Sellers game. I don't know. I think there's one loss in there, and I think A&M is going to start out 6-3, not 7-2. So if you want to switch it with LSU, you could. I will with South Carolina. You then get your final bye, and then you get a pretty comfortable win against New Mexico State, although they did upset Auburn last year. Speaking of which, you got Auburn up next on the road. Another game, really, really tough to pick, but I think because of your bye week and then pretty easy game against New Mexico State, you should be pretty well rested, well prepared, and I think you're able to win on the road at Auburn because of some nice scheduling advantages and nice scheduling. The scheduling helps you. It doesn't necessarily give you advantage over Auburn specifically, but it at least helps you be ready for the game. And then I think will be pretty good at stopping what I think is a somewhat limited Auburn offense. And then huge game, probably one of the most anticipated games I would assume of the year, the return of the Texas versus Texas A&M rivalry. It's going to be in Kyle Field, College Station. I mean, it's going to be huge. Thanksgiving weekend. I think the environment that I'm imagining being there almost wants me to pick Texas A&M because I think it's going to be so loud and people are going to be so excited, and I think the team's going to give it their best shot. But I think Texas is actually a team with an offensive line equipped to handle a defensive front like A&M's and the receivers to test the secondary. And I think defensively, they've got enough talent to keep A&M in check. And I think Texas is going to win here. But if 8-4 season in the first year under Mike Elko, I think is promising. And I think isn't something you can be too mad about if you're a Texas A&M fan. The Oklahoma Sooners are undergoing a big transition from the Big 12 to the SEC in 2024. How will they be able to handle it? Let's find out. The strengths of this team are in their wide receiver core and the quarterback upside, and just an overall explosiveness on offense with even Gavin Sawchuk there at running back, I think could be a breakout player. But this wide receiver core is one of the best in the country. You bring in Deion Burks, a true number 1 from Purdue, and then Nick Anderson was your number 1 last year, but as a freshman. So I think another year he's going to improve, and he could be like a true number 1 as well. So you have a really nice duo there. And then Jaleel Farouk comes back, as well as Angelo Anthony, who were both really good. Last year, Angelo Anthony eventually went down and injured, was injured for the season. He was a transfer from Michigan, but I think he should come back healthy and be able to help this wide receiver core, which is very explosive. The weaknesses, I think, are in the O-line. You lost multiple really good O-linemen, transferred away, one to Missouri. I forget where the other one transferred, but the point is you lost 2 players who were expecting to be back, and then you lost other players from, just eligibility. So the O-line, there's real concerns there. So and against the SEC especially, with teams you would think like Georgia or Alabama, A&M, the way these teams recruit at the defensive line could cause some problems for Oklahoma. And then I think the schedule is also a weakness. We'll get into that more later, and then we'll get into predictions now. But just one thing I want to say before we do the game by game is I think Oklahoma is really underrated defensively this year. I think Brent Venables, really good defensive coach, and I think they have really good linebackers. Danny Stutzman's there, McCullough is there. I think it's a really good linebacker core. I think the secondary with Billy Bowman there, and I think Peyton Bowen was really highly recruited and is going to improve in his second year. I think there's talent there, and I think you've recruited the D-line well. I think this second year in a row you're bringing in a 5-star freshman for the defensive line. This year it's interior. Last year it was an edge rusher. I think you're improving the quality of player on defense, and the coaching should be really good. So I think Oklahoma defensively should be pretty good. One of the better, I think, really solid defenses in the country, and I think it's going to be underrated. Now, getting into the game-by-game predictions, I think you start off with a win against Temple. I've talked about how I think Oklahoma's underrated defensively and very explosive offensively. And you're at home on a Friday. I don't think Temple's got much of a chance here to pull this off. Then home against Houston, who I think is one of the weaker teams in the Big 12 this year. They do have a quarterback in Donovan Smith who can maybe make some plays, put up some points. But the defense is not going to be able to stop Oklahoma, and Oklahoma should be able to win. Then Tulane, I think really, really tough game here. Tulane's going to have Ty Thompson at quarterback, I presume. Former Oklahoma receiver Mario Williams there at Tulane as well. He's very good. The running game should be good. I think Tulane's a top 25 caliber team, but I think Oklahoma's like a borderline or like a top 15 caliber team, maybe even top 10. I think they're really, really good this year. So I think you're still able to beat Tulane. And then at home against Tennessee, this is a game I'm really excited for. A really interesting QB battle between Jackson Arnold and Nico. Both are going to be 5-star, or both are in the sophomore year, but were 5-star, probably I think top 10 recruits just a year ago, getting their first full year of starting. It'll be interesting to see who gets the early edge here. Both are very talented. Both with Jackson Arnold is set up really well with these receivers he has. Tennessee's got good receivers too, and has Josh Heupel coaching him up. I almost picked Tennessee here because of James Pierce on the defensive line. I think could be really disruptive against a weaker Oklahoma offensive line. But I think because the rest of the defense is not as strong, I think you could send some double teams there and even just give enough time for these receivers to get any space. I think will allow Oklahoma to perform well enough at home to get the win. And then I have you getting kind of a surprise win on the road at Auburn, because Auburn's pretty good, or they're solid, I think, but I don't think they're. I think they're poorly equipped to deal with high-scoring teams, and I think Oklahoma has the potential to be just that this year if Jackson Arnold performs well. Again, I believe in Jackson Arnold this year. I think he's set up to do well. I think he's very talented. But I do think there are turnover concerns. And I think overall he's just one of the biggest X factors in college football. I think if he's an elite player, Oklahoma has a chance to really surprise some people. And I think he might be an elite player. Now you get a bye week before the Red River rivalry. This is a 50-50 game for me. You really could go either way. But I was generous giving 3 straight wins against Tulane, Tennessee, and Auburn, where I think any one of them could go the either way. I gave 3 straight wins to Oklahoma, and I think I'm not going to give a 4th game where I just give it to Oklahoma. So I think you lose because Texas, I think, is a little bit better, but I don't think that really matters in the Red River rivalry because last year I was convinced Texas was definitely beating Oklahoma, and then, of course, Oklahoma won. But I do think this year Texas is going to get it done. Next up, you got another home game in Norman. against South Carolina, who's also starting a sophomore quarterback. But I think Oklahoma's defense, uh, especially against a team like South Carolina, which doesn't have the most firepower, is going to perform well. And I think Oklahoma's going to beat South Carolina here before going on the road in what I think will be a really fun game against Ole Miss. I think it should be pretty high scoring. Maybe the two best wide receiver cores in the SEC. Oklahoma's, I would say, is actually, I would say Ole Miss is actually a little better than Oklahoma even. Want to mention Missouri's up there as well. Tennessee's pretty good. But still, you get the point. Two really dynamic wide receiver rooms. Jackson Dart, more veteran at quarterback. And the Ole Miss should be improved defensively. So I think two pretty evenly matched teams here. But Ole Miss is at home, and I think Jackson Dart, more experience in this kind of tight game. Although I think Jackson Arnold will be building experience through this point. I just trust Ole Miss's veteran status. They've been here. I trust them to get it done. But I do think Oklahoma should clearly beat Maine, but will lose at Missouri. Unfortunately, I think this is pretty similar to the Ole Miss game. You could kind of copy and paste what I said there. Two of the best wide receiver cores. Quarterbacks are good. Running backs good. Should be pretty high scoring, tight game. But I trust the veteran and Brady Cook at home to be able to figure it out. And because two evenly matched teams, but I think the veteran leadership on offense and then the home field advantage for Missouri is enough for me to give them the win. So after starting 5-0, you're 2-3 over your next 5 games. You're 7-3, and you've kind of you were maybe like in the playoff spotlight. You've kind of fallen from that, and now you're gonna get a home game against Alabama, who I think's maybe the best team in the SEC, but certainly up there. But at home, off a bye, I think Oklahoma's actually able to win. I think there's enough. Even I think Alabama's secondary questions are being overstated. I still don't think they're like shut down by any means. I think Jackson Arnold can have a big day at home. I think it's a tough place to play in Norman. And I think the defense is actually good enough to contain a Kalen DeBoer-led offense. I think Oklahoma's going to get a really, really big win here. But then I think they're going to be really excited. This is to beat Alabama year one in the SEC is just huge. And I think you have a letdown against LSU, who I think Oklahoma's better than LSU this year. But on the road in Baton Rouge, really tough place to play. And I don't think you're going to fully get up. I think you're going to get all the way up for Alabama. Tough to get up 2 weeks in a row all the way. So I think you lose. But finish 8-4, which I think a lot of people in the media, I think, would say this is being really, really optimistic for Oklahoma. But I think they're an underrated team this year. And if they had a slightly easier schedule, I think they'd be a real playoff threat. Last year, the LSU Tigers wasted a Heisman-winning season from quarterback Jaden Daniels and the number one offense in the country with a completely inept defense. Will the same mistakes be made this year? Let's see. So the strengths of this team are in their offensive line. You've got Will Campbell there at one tackle, who could be, he's potentially the best tackle in the country. And then opposite of him, you're going to have Emory Jones at the other offensive tackle. This should be the best duo in the country and maybe the best O-line in the country. And then I think another strength is your staff upgrades, bringing in Blake Baker defensively from Missouri. Should help the defense a lot in my mind. But then not enough for me to exclude defense from the weaknesses. Last year, the defense was just so bad. And I don't think you can, even with bringing in upgrades, I don't think you can change that overnight. I think if you want to be optimistic, maybe Harold Perkins figures out the inside linebacker role better. But he went from being probably the best freshman in the country his freshman year to never hearing from him last year, moving from outside linebacker to inside. And I think LSU missed on most of their portal targets, and I don't think the defense is going to be that much better this year, even with major upgrades on the staff. And then you lose Jaden Daniels, Brian Thomas, Malik Neighbors on offense. And I think you have good players filling in for them. I think Garrett Nussenmeyer is pretty good. I think Kyron Lacey is a good receiver. You bring in C.J. Daniels from Liberty. You've got other talented receivers. So I think they're still good. But last year you had the Heisman, so the best player in all of college football, 2 first-round wide receivers, the best offense. So I don't think you'll be on that level. But getting into the game by game, I think what will be an absolute shootout to open the season in Vegas. 2 teams that are pretty much all offense, no defense. Like, if either of these teams, you could say, has a solid defense for sure. I mean, they're a playoff team. But I don't think either of them, I trust either of their defenses. But I think in a pure shootout, I lean with a Lincoln Riley team to get the win there. So I think LSU is going to start off with a loss in Vegas against USC. I then think you beat Nicholls and South Carolina. The South Carolina game and the USC game, I guess technically both USC, it was 50-50. I don't think LSU starts 3-0 is what I'm trying to say. I think you either lose the USC game or the South Carolina game, but I think you're going to lose one early, but I don't think you lose both. So if you wanted to flip that, you could, but I think you're going to lose one, so I went with the USC in the pure shootout game, but I think you're able to outscore South Carolina was kind of my train of thought there. I think UCLA is taking a step back this year, and LSU should be able to beat them. And then South Alabama is actually, they're a pretty good program, but they lost their coach, and I think you're able to beat them because, you're LSU. And then I think a really, really good bye week. One of the best, I would say, getting this bye week before Ole Miss, I think, is such a scheduling advantage that I give LSU the win. And I think Ole Miss is clearly a better team than LSU this year, but I really like the spot on the schedule. Inversely, I really don't like the spot on the schedule in this next game. I think you get the really good scheduling position, you pull off an upset against Ole Miss, you're excited, and then you got a trap game against Arkansas. A road game against Arkansas between Ole Miss and A&M, I think it's it's a great spot for a letdown, and I think Arkansas is going to get an upset here. Now, like I said, I think Ole Miss is clearly a better team than LSU, but I still think LSU is going to win. I think LSU is clearly a better team than Arkansas, but I think Arkansas is going to win. It's just weird the way college football can work sometimes. So I feel like this is going to be one of those weird scenarios. And then I think you lose a road game at Kyle Field. I think LSU is a similar level of team to A&M, but I think home field advantage, and then I think Connor Wigman can make some big plays. I think the defensive line of A&M can disrupt LSU's offense enough to get a pretty big win for A&M. Then you get a bye week here, and then off a bye week, a home game, usually like that, but it's against Alabama, who also has a bye week right before this. And I think you don't really get the advantage of extra rest. And I think Alabama's too good, beats LSU, and now LSU's on a 3-game losing streak after starting 5-1. So they're now 5-4. You got a road game against Florida. I think LSU's kind of reeling at the end of this year here. I think you lose another one. You have 4 straight losses. But I do think you beat Vanderbilt. Because even with, I think, LSU reeling a little bit, Vanderbilt, I don't think, has the talent to pull an upset here. But now you're 6-5. But I do think the win gets you out of the rut a little bit. And I think Oklahoma is kind of in a bad spot here. If you see my Oklahoma video, or if you're watching the full compilation, I think they're got a letdown spot here after a big win for them. I think LSU wins, and it finishes the year 7-5. Based off preseason expectations, this would be really disappointing, but I'm very pessimistic on LSU this year. I don't see how they're ranked preseason 13. I wouldn't even rank them preseason top 25. So we'll see if I'm right on that, but I'm definitely pessimistic on LSU football this season. Last year, the Tennessee Volunteers were not quite as good as they were 2 years ago, and Joe Milton was not able to replace Hendon Hooker as a quarterback. We'll see if Nico Iamaleava is able to do so this year. I think the strengths of this team are in their offensive firepower, and then going along with that, the offensive coaching with Josh Heupel. I think he's one of the best in the country. And you're going to have guys like Brew McCoy, Squirrel White. You bring in Chris Brazil. So I think you got good receivers. And I think Nico's a really talented quarterback. So I think there's a lot of explosiveness on this offense. I think the D-line's also strength, headlined by James Pierce, who I think's got a real shot, or is projected, I think right now by a lot of places, to be the number 1 overall pick in the NFL draft. So that I think the D-line's pretty good, and he's the headliner of that unit. The weaknesses are in the secondary. I think teams with a good passing game are going to be able to do some pretty good things moving the ball against Tennessee that way. And then the depth of the defense, I have question marks about. If some top players go down, how well is this defense able to fill those voids? Starting off the year, I think you beat Chattanooga before a really big early season game that I'm looking forward to between Tennessee and the NC State Wolfpack. I think NC State's a good early test for Tennessee, because I think them having Noah Rogers and Kevin Concepcion at receiver, as well as Justin Jolly at tight end, is going to test the Tennessee secondary. And then I think Dave Doeren usually has a good defensive scheme that'll test Nico, even if NC State's losing more defensive players than usual. But I think it's actually too good of a test, and Tennessee's not going to win this one. I think Nico probably makes some mistakes in his first really big game of college football. And then I think the secondary is still improving at this point, is not quite ready for the NC State passing game, led by Grayson McCall and those receivers. I do think you beat Kent State before a big road game against Oklahoma. Oklahoma's a team, I think, one of the best teams equipped to expose the secondary, but weaker on the O-line, where this defensive line could disrupt them. So, depending on how bad you think the Oklahoma O-line is, maybe James Pierce is just having like a huge day against them and really disrupting Oklahoma and Jackson Arnold. But I think the O-line holds up well enough and gives him enough time to deal to his receivers, like a Deion Burks, like a Nick Anderson, and is going to put up points. And I think Tennessee will also put up points with Nico. But I think on the road, I'm leaning Oklahoma to win this game. Coming off the bye, you're going to have a road game in Fayetteville against Arkansas. And Arkansas is a team that even at home for Arkansas, I don't think has enough offensive firepower. Then coming off the bye, you're going to have a road game against Arkansas in Fayetteville. Even at home for Arkansas, I don't think they have enough firepower to defeat Tennessee. So I think Tennessee gets the win there. And then you come back home against rival Florida, who I think also doesn't have quite enough firepower to keep up with Tennessee. And then it's the third Saturday in October. Huge game at home. Neyland Stadium's going to be rocking. Last time this game happened, the goalpost ended up in the river. It was a great game. The Bryce Young, Hendon Hooker game, absolute classic. I hope this one's as good. I think Tennessee has a pretty good shot to win this. I think you've got really talented quarterback again. You've got good weapons. The D-line's pretty good. But I think Alabama returning Jalen Milroe. I think middle of the year is catching a pretty good stride with those receivers. I think the O-line is really good. I think that Alabama's O-line's better than Tennessee's D-line. I think they're going to move the ball on the ground even pretty effectively. And I think the receivers are improving up to this point. And it's going to be a pretty good passing game, especially with Kalen DeBoer coaching. And I think Tennessee loses at home to Alabama. Then you get a pretty good bye week before having this final 5-game stretch. You're 4-3, not the best start, probably a very disappointing start. But off the bye, I do think you beat Kentucky and Mississippi State, neither of which do I think has, like I've talked about, Tennessee's going to put up points this year. And neither team has a defense that's going to shut that down. So you're going to have an offense that's going to put up, you would think, at least, probably at least 30 points to beat Tennessee if you don't have a defense that's shutting them down. And I don't think either of these teams have a defense shutting them down, and I don't think they're putting up that many points to beat Tennessee. So I think Tennessee is going to win both those. And then they have home field advantage. So you go a 2-game win streak, you're 6-3, but then you go on the road to Georgia. It's a loss. Georgia does have the defense to limit Tennessee. They've got the elite talent. Mikael Williams, Malachi Starks are elite players on defense. They got enough to limit Tennessee. They're going to get to Nico. He's probably going to throw a few interceptions. First game against Georgia. I don't think Tennessee can win this game. But then UTEP should be a win, and then you should beat rival Vanderbilt, probably the worst team in the SEC. And so you go on a nice 4-1 stretch to end the year to kind of make up for the 4-3 start and finish 8-4, which I don't think is too bad in a really tough SEC this year. Ole Miss Rebels and Lane Kiffin have had back-to-back 10-win seasons. Will they be able to improve on that in 2024? Let's see. The strengths of this team are definitely in their offensive firepower and their transfer portal additions. So I think they have probably the best wide receiver core in the SEC and maybe in the country. You got Trey Harris as your number 1. Jordan Watkins is your number 2, who could be a number 1 in a lot of places. And then Antoine Juice Wells, maybe your 3, which is just crazy because coming into last year, he was like a true number 1 at South Carolina before the injury. So just absolutely stacked at wide receiver. And then Pierce Scorn's a good tight end. And Jackson Dart's one of the better quarterbacks in the country to distribute to all of them. You do lose Quinshaw Judkins to Ohio State, but Ulysses Bentley should be able to fill in pretty nicely at running back, and the O-line's pretty good. So just a lot of firepower offensively, and you're coached by Lane Kiffin, really good offensive mind. And then portal additions, you bring in Princely Umenean, sorry if I'm saying the name wrong, edge rusher from Florida, who was, I think, second team All-SEC. Then Walter Nolan, former number 1 overall recruit on the interior of the D-line. You bring in Chris Paul from Arkansas at linebacker. And then you bring back Santaron Perkins, who's kind of an edge slash outside linebacker kind of player. So the defense should take steps forward. And then the weaknesses, I would say, are in the depth of talent, just because so much of what they bring in on defense is from the portal. So the second string of guys may not be as good as the first. And then the secondary, I'd say, is the one area where there's still some concerns on how good it will be. I don't think it'll be terrible, but definitely some concerns there. You open up the season, getting into predictions very easily. Furman and Middle Tennessee should both be blowout wins for Ole Miss, and it shouldn't be close. Then you go on the road to Wake Forest, another Power 4 team. Maybe they're able to compete with you. I doubt it. They don't. I think they're bringing in new quarterback. Hank Bachmeier, I think, should start. He might not win the job, though, but Ole Miss should clearly win this and also beat Georgia Southern in what should be a really easy 4-0 start for a team that's preseason ranked number 6. You then have a home game against Kentucky, who I don't think can keep up with the Ole Miss offense. Should be a win. You then go on the road to South Carolina. For your 6th straight game, I almost picked South Carolina just because, you're playing 6 straight games and then you got a road game. But I don't think it's like you're like really worn out from these first 5. It's been pretty easy. And I think you put up enough points to beat South Carolina. But then winning back-to-back road games, I don't think you're going to be able to do. Especially LSU here is going to have a scheduling advantage with a bye before this. And I think LSU has an offense that can keep up with Ole Miss. Should be a shootout. But I think scheduling advantage goes to LSU. And they have an offense good enough to keep up with Ole Miss. I think they pull an upset here. And then you get a first bye week. And you're sitting at 6-1. And then off a bye week, I think what should be a great game against Oklahoma. 2 really good offenses. 2 really improved defenses. Similarly matched in my opinion. But at home and more veteran team, I lean Ole Miss. I think Jackson Dart can make knows what plays he needs to make at this point in his career to come out with a win at home against a team that's pretty even to them. You then go on the road to Arkansas, who's one of the worst teams in the SEC this year and cannot keep up with Ole Miss, before what is likely your biggest game of the season at home against the Georgia Bulldogs, preseason #1 team in the country. Last year, Ole Miss got a shot at Georgia, and it got ugly. It got very ugly. I think Ole Miss is a lot better. I think Georgia's about the same. And I don't think Ole Miss has closed that gap yet. Even with all the improvements they're making on defense, all the transfer additions, even at home, I don't think the gap's been closed enough to beat Georgia. And I don't think the gap's as big as it appeared last year, but I think it was still substantial. I think it's gotten smaller, but I think Ole Miss is still a little further away from being able to beat Georgia in the SEC. You then get your final bye week in a spot I like because it allows you to recover from what's probably a very physical game against Georgia, and I think allows you to beat a Florida team that's also Florida team that's just very beaten down based on the end of their schedule here. And then in the Egg Bowl, Mississippi State's going to probably struggle a lot in the SEC this year. You should win and finish the season 10-2. The Missouri Tigers are coming off one of their best season in recent memories and will look to replicate that in 2024. Let's see if they can. So the strengths of this team, they bring back their quarterback and their wide receiver group. In Mookie Cooper, Luther Burden, who's maybe the best receiver in college football. I have him ranked second behind Tatora McMillan at Arizona. But, he's definitely in that conversation. Mookie Cooper's there. Theo Weiss is there. Bring in some impact freshmen. Should be really good at wide receiver. And Brady Cook's back at quarterback and should do a really good job of getting the ball to them. Weaknesses, I think, are in the secondary because you lost, I think, either a first-round pick or a second-round pick is on the fence. And then I think his name was Reckenstraw. I might be forgetting his name. But I know he was very good for you last year. You do bring in Toriano Pride Jr. out of the transfer portal from Clemson, who's talented. You bring in some other players, but they're not proven. So the secondary could have some question marks. And then the depth of talent, just because Missouri recruits pretty well, but not nearly as well as some of the top teams in the SEC. And when you're a preseason top-ranked team like Missouri, you usually have, I would say, a little more depth of talent than they do. Getting into the game by game, I think the first two games are a pretty easy start for Missouri, beating Murray State and Buffalo. Neither team, I think, is built to compete with a team as good as Missouri. Then you upgrade in competition a little bit with Boston College, who I think, with Thomas Castellanos at quarterback, could pose an interesting challenge for the Missouri defense and keep it reasonable, but I don't think they're on the same level as Missouri this year, and I don't think they're going to win a road game against Missouri. And then Vanderbilt, very likely the worst team in the SEC, is not going to beat Missouri at home. So you get a pretty light 4-0 start to start off the year before your first bye week, and a schedule that is nicely divided into 3 even segments. Off a bye, I think it's a really good spot to prepare for A&M, and I think it helps you to win here. Because if you were at Kyle Field week 5 with no scheduling advantage, I'd probably lean A&M. But with the scheduling advantage of the bye and just being really well prepared, I would think with how Missouri performed last year, I trust their coaching with Eli Drinkwitz. I think he's a pretty good coach. And I think you're able to beat A&M even with all the talent there. Maybe more talented than Missouri. Probably more talented than Missouri. But I think their offense can put up some points on A&M. And their defense, I don't think A&M's explosive enough to where Missouri's defense will be exposed. Then UMass, another pretty easy game that I think Missouri should win comfortably. And then a home game against Auburn. I think Missouri puts up too many points for Auburn. And now Missouri is 7-0 with a road game against Alabama. Pretty big swing game. You win this game, you're going to be 8-0 with another bye. And if you're looking at this final stretch, it's not too bad. You would think if you win this game, you're going to the SEC championship at the very least and potentially clinching a first-round bye. But in the road in Tuscaloosa and Bryant-Denny Stadium, I don't see it happening. Missouri's a good team. They've improved a lot. And I like Missouri a lot. Last year I picked them. I actually picked them to go 9-3, which a lot of people didn't think was possible, and then they even outperformed that. I think they're a good team, but they're not on Alabama's level, even on a neutral field. Certainly on the road, it'll be a big game. I don't think they'll get blown out, but I don't think they're not beating Alabama. Now you get your second bye week. See how strong you can finish the season. I think Oklahoma is going to be a really tough game, really tight game. But I think Brady Cook makes enough plays down the stretch in what I think is a close game against a pretty good Oklahoma defense to come out with a win at home. But then I think you do lose at South Carolina to a South Carolina team that's kind of clicking down the stretch. Lenore Sellers, I think, is probably playing his best ball of the year at this time. And I think they've improved or ironed out a lot of the flaws they might have earlier in the season. And I think they upset Missouri. But I do think you win against Mississippi State because I think they're going to struggle pretty much throughout the year. Same with Arkansas. I don't think either puts up much of a fight against Missouri. And I think Missouri back-to-back double-digit win seasons. And I think they go 10-2. A very good season for Missouri, and it's a really good spot to be in as a program. Last year, the Texas Longhorns made their first ever appearance in the college football playoff. Will they do it again in 2024? Let's find out. The strengths of this team are in their quarterback room, not only with returning starter Quinn Ewers, who's one of the best quarterbacks in college football, but also in backup Arch Manning, who I would say is likely the best backup quarterback in college football and extremely talented. The strengths are also in their offensive line, led by Kelvin Banks Jr. They have what I think is likely a top 5 offensive line in the country. Maybe the best in the SEC. Alabama's is very good. LSU's is very good. Georgia's is very good. SEC in general has a lot of really good offensive line play. Now we go into the weaknesses. I think there's some question marks in the interior of the defensive line, just because you're losing Sweat and Murphy, who were both NFL draft picks and really, really good for Texas. That basically just stopped any run game that other teams tried to do. But now the run game might open up more for opponents of Texas. And then running back, you just lost C.J. Baxter for the year. And you lost another running back for the year as well, who was projected to get get some carries in the backfield. Getting into game-by-game predictions, Texas opens up with a home game against Colorado State, a team clearly at a talent deficit, and Texas should clearly beat them, setting up a huge Week 2 game in the Big House against the reigning national champions, the Michigan Wolverines. And this game just really reminds me of last year's road game at Alabama. Alabama's bringing in a new quarterback who's dynamic running the ball but still questions throwing the ball. That could be the case if Michigan starts Alex Orji. And then Alabama improves later in the year and is a threat by the end, but in Week 2 is not quite as good or not as quite good as Texas. And I see a lot of similarities here, and that's why I'm going to give Texas the win trepidatiously, because I think Michigan still is a top 10 defense. I think it's the best defense in the country still. But at the worst top 10, that I think could give Texas offense problems, who's also bringing in some new players, especially in the receiver group. And then I think Texas has, like I talked about, some weaknesses on the interior of the D-line potentially. And I think Michigan's going to want to run the ball a lot. So with the home field advantage and I think an ability to run the ball pretty well, I think Michigan's going to keep it close at the worst. And I was very close to giving them the win. But ultimately, I went with Texas just because of the experience. Then I think the next 2 games are pretty easy wins for Texas against UTSA and ULM before their first ever SEC game. And it's a pretty favorable one. You start off SEC play with a home game against one of the, what I would say is a bottom 3 team in the SEC this year. And I think Texas wins it. They're more talented, better on offense and defense, and at home. And now you get your bye week before the Red River Shootout against Oklahoma. This transfers over from the Big 12. Last year, I thought Texas was clearly the better team, and then they still lost. So you never really know what's going to happen in a game like this. But I think Texas, again, is a little bit better this year. I think Oklahoma is very good. But I think Texas is a little bit better, and I don't think they're going to lose 2 years in a row while having the better team. So I'm going to give them the win. And now you set up huge, colossal showdown with the Georgia Bulldogs. At this point, Texas is 6-0, probably at worst, ranked fourth in the country, maybe higher. Georgia's probably around there as well. This could potentially be a top 4 matchup. You got Quinn Ewers versus Carson Beck. You got 2 great O-lines. A lot of talent just across the board. And I just don't like the spot for Texas. I think if Georgia was who Texas played off the bye, I would probably take Texas. If they played Georgia after Vanderbilt instead of Vanderbilt after Georgia, I might also take Texas there. But because you have to play the Red River Shootout the week before, and what I think is going to be an emotional game, it's a rivalry game. I think it's hard to get a college team to get up and play at their peak performance 2 weeks in a row. And I think to beat Georgia, you got to play at your peak performance. So I think they're going to lose to Georgia, but bounce back with a win against a Vanderbilt team who's not nearly talented enough to compete with Texas. And now you get your final bye week of the season before a home game with Florida, which I think you should win. You should be well rested, and you're a better team than Florida. You go on the road to Arkansas. Maybe Arkansas's got something for you. Taylor Green's maybe playing well, causing some problems. But at the end of the day, Texas, too physical, too talented across the board, too much explosiveness on offense. They're going to beat Arkansas. And then with the home game against Kentucky, Kentucky just doesn't have the athletes to the dynamic offense to keep up with a Texas team that's going to put up points on this Kentucky defense. And now you're sitting at 10-1 with the renewed rivalry, Texas versus Texas A&M. Thanksgiving weekend. It's going to be great. I'm looking forward to it a lot. Kyle Field's going to be rocking. I mean, it's going to be electric there. It's going to be really, really intense with how long people have waited for this rivalry to return. These fan bases do not like each other. So I think it's going to be a really emotional game. And I don't think you can write off, even though Texas I think is better, I don't think you can write off a really talented Texas A&M team, especially in an emotional game like this. But I do lean Texas to win. I think their O-line can hold up against what Texas A&M's biggest strength is, which is their defensive line. So I think that's a big positive for Texas. And then I think they're going to be able to move the ball against a Texas A&M secondary, which isn't the strongest. And I think Texas finishes with a final record of 11-1. In 2023, the Georgia Bulldogs' 2-year run of national championships was snapped. Will they be able to get back to the top of the mountain in 2024? Let's find out. The strengths of this team are in their overall talent. Them and Alabama are the 2 most talented in the rosters in the country, according to 24/7 Sports Talent Composite. And they recruit so well that even players you don't even know about. So you think Georgia loses a lot of players, but the players that fill in would have been starting in a bunch of other places. And we don't know them yet, but they'll have players break out that'll be stars of college football. And then the O-line is really good, one of the best in college football, and amongst the best in the SEC, obviously. But there's a lot of good O-lines in the SEC. The weaknesses are potentially in defensive experience, as Georgia continuously loses players to the NFL draft. But there's still big-time players back, and Malachi Starks, Mikael Williams are the biggest names. And I think another weakness is this is a really tough schedule for Georgia, especially compared to the schedule they had last year. This is a big step up. And even though I would probably rank them preseason number 1, the schedule can make it really, really tough for them. Included in that is opening first week in a neutral site game. Neutral site, but it's in Atlanta against Clemson, who I think could give Georgia a pretty decent test to start the year. I think Clemson's got a really good defense that'll test how good Georgia's offense is. Because I think it's good, but will it be like a top 5 caliber offense? Will it compete to be one of the best in the country? We'll see how well it can do against a really good Clemson defense. And then we'll also see, is Clemson's offense, has it taken a big leap? Is it able to move the ball against a Georgia defense? But at the end of the day, Georgia, it's a tough schedule, and Clemson, I think, is probably a borderline top 10 team. But Georgia, I would say, is preseason number one, and in a neutral site that really favors them, they should win. And they should also get a win against Tennessee Tech, obviously. And then you go on the road to Kentucky. And even on the road, I don't think this is really a close game. I don't think Kentucky meets there's a certain level of team you have to be to beat Georgia if it's not a trap game. And I don't see this as really a spot that Georgia would have a letdown. Because maybe if like you were playing Alabama afterwards instead of after the bye, maybe Kentucky would have a chance. But because that bye's there and you're coming off Tennessee Tech, Kentucky would have to just outplay Georgia, which I don't think's possible for Kentucky. Now off the bye, you're going to go on the road to Tuscaloosa in a game that probably feels like a must-win for Kirby Smart because of the struggles he had facing Alabama under Nick Saban. But now Saban's gone, Kalen DeBoer comes in. So you would expect, it can't be an Alabama problem. It had to be a Nick Saban problem. That'll probably be the storyline going in. You do have the bye before, but Alabama does as well. On the road in Tuscaloosa, I think Georgia is a little better than Alabama, but I think that home field advantage and maybe a little bit over preparation by Georgia, which it sounds weird, but I think they're gonna feel more pressure to win this game and maybe underperform, whereas if they were just relaxed, I kind of is what I'm feeling here, and I think they're gonna lose to Alabama. I then think they bounce back against Auburn pretty dominantly, I would imagine. And then Mississippi State's the same. Mississippi State should be a blowout. Auburn, I don't think will move the ball very well against Georgia at all. And now you have another really brutal game on the road against Texas. And this is what I'm talking about, the schedule. I mean, Clemson, I'd say, is a borderline top 10 team, but it's a neutral site. But then week 4, so that's week 1. Then week 4, you're on the road to Alabama, who I have preseason top 4. I know they're ranked, I think, 5 or 6 in the actual preseason poll. I have them 4, so that's a brutal game. Then you go on the road to Texas, who I have preseason 5. Brutal game. So the schedule's just so difficult. But I do think you beat Texas. This is because Texas is going to play the Red River Shootout right before this. If they weren't, I would probably actually give Texas a win here, but I don't think Texas is going to play their best game, and I think to beat Georgia, Texas would need to play one of their best games of the year. I don't think they're going to do that. Now you get your second bye week of the year before playing your rival Florida and Jacksonville. Georgia's clearly better than Florida this year and should beat them before another brutal game. Your third road game against a top 6 team, in my opinion. And so, Georgia, I think, could be the best team in the country, but playing 3 road games against the teams of this caliber, I could easily see getting 2 losses out of these 3. I'm hesitantly, just because of how good Georgia's been under Kirby Smart, winning 2 national titles, how good they were last year when they played Ole Miss, hesitantly giving them 2 out of these 3 wins. But I mean, 2 losses is very, very possible in those 3 games because of how difficult they are. And Georgia could still, with the 12-team playoff, make the playoff at 10-2 and go on a run when everything's, more even on neutral site. But with these road games, I mean, they could easily lose 2 of these games. But with how good they looked against Ole Miss last year, I don't think Ole Miss has closed that gap fully, even at home. I think Georgia wins and also beats Tennessee. I think Nico probably plays one. I don't think he's ready to, even at this point, I think he's a very good quarterback, but I think with a young quarterback first year starting, you'll have up and downs. And I would imagine that road game against Georgia is probably a down. And then you beat UMass by a billion before playing your rival Georgia Tech at home on a Friday. You're just too good. You'll beat Georgia Tech. I have you finishing 11-1. 10-2 though. I thought about it. I really did. But you finished 11-1. And I got you headed to the SEC championship game. Your fans might be mad that you lost to Alabama, but if you win the SEC championship game, you'll be set up to go compete to win another national title. And if you win another national title, it'll all work itself out. The Alabama Crimson Tide are losing the greatest coach of all time in Nick Saban, replacing him with former Washington coach Kalen DeBoer. Will they be able to replicate the success they had under Nick Saban? Let's find out. The strengths of this team are in their roster talent. They consistently recruit either the best or second best class in the country every year, and the depth of talent on this roster is second to none. And then the run game should be very strong. They have a stable of running backs that I think could be very good. The O-line last year was great in run blocking and should be again this year. And then quarterback Jalen Milroe is also a threat with his legs. That just adds to how good this run game is at Alabama. The weaknesses are potentially at wide receiver. Jeremy Bernard transfers in from Washington, is projected to be the number one. But last year at Washington, he was more like a number 4 when everyone was healthy, maybe a 3 when they weren't. So that's not ideal in my opinion. Ryan Williams does come in as a true freshman, so we'll see how good he is right away. And then the other question marks are in the secondary, where you lose Caleb Downs to Ohio State, but you still have Malachi Moore, who's a great safety. But yeah, so questions in the secondary, especially the second safety. So maybe a team with a really good passing attack could cause some problems for Alabama. You open up the season with Western Kentucky. That's a win. And then you play USF, who's actually pretty good this year, in my opinion, when I evaluate them. And obviously, or if you remember, last year, the USF game was a lot closer than people thought it would be. Don't think that's the case this year. You win, and you get a pretty big non-conference game on the road against Wisconsin. Wisconsin will be trying to use the air raid this year with Tyler Van Dyke at quarterback. And even if last year it was more of a hybrid offense, they're trying to go full air raid this year. I don't think it's going to be quite as effective as it will in the future, especially in the early stages of the season. And I think Alabama will win fairly comfortably. Then you get a bye before your biggest game of the season, the Georgia Bulldogs at home in Tuscaloosa. Alabama's had a lot of success recently against Georgia with Nick Saban. You only lost one game. It was a really big game in the national title. But you've also beaten Georgia in the national title. Last year you beat them in the SEC championship game. But now it's a new staff. It's Kalen DeBoer. It's not Nick Saban. Will Kirby Smart show that he's clearly Georgia surpassed Alabama now that Nick Saban's gone? Or will Alabama continue to be a thorn in the side of the Georgia Bulldogs? I think Alabama's going to get it done at home, and Kalen DeBoer they're going to announce themselves as still right there with Georgia at the top of the SEC and maybe the best program in the SEC, even with Nick Saban gone. I then think you destroy Vanderbilt, unfortunately. I like Vanderbilt, but they will get crushed. And then home game against South Carolina will also be a pretty easy win. And you reach bowl eligibility at 6-0, just 6 games into the season. Now, third Saturday in October, huge game at Tennessee. Nico, I think, probably has a big game here. Last time we saw this game, goalposts were in the river, instant classic. Alabama barely lost to Tennessee. Or last time we saw this game in Neyland, what I mean to say. Last year, Alabama won. But I think this year, Kalen DeBoer there. We'll see. Can Josh Heupel get the early edge on him? I think it's going to have fireworks. I see a lot of points happening. But I think Alabama's defense will make more stops than Tennessee's. I think it's just better defense. And even on the road, that's just what I'm leaning with. And then I think Missouri, who I think at this point, if you see my Missouri prediction, I think both teams will be 7-0. Probably both, maybe top 5, but at least top 10 matchup here. I think it'll be huge. A lot of hype around it, but I think it'll be kind of a letdown. I think Alabama will pretty convincingly beat Missouri. I think Missouri will keep it close because of their passing attack against Alabama secondary that's not the strongest, but Alabama I think will move the ball on the ground enough and have a lot of time of possession, because I don't think Missouri's defensive line will hold up the best against Alabama's offensive line in that run game and Jalen Milroe running around. And then, so I think they'll kind of control the ball, and Missouri will just wear down over the course of the game, and eventually Alabama will pull away. Then you get a bye, and then I think you beat LSU on the road off of the bye. Both teams have a bye before this, so actually in neither bye does Alabama get a rest advantage. But I do think they're both good spots because I think getting to prepare for Georgia is good, and then after Tennessee and Missouri, I think pretty tough games, I would say. It's good to get rest before LSU, even if it's not necessarily a rest advantage, since both teams will be rested. But Alabama, I think, will beat LSU just because LSU, I think, is too bad defensively this year, and even their offense, will put up points against Alabama. But this is another team I think Alabama can control the time of possession against, and basically keep the ball away from enough where LSU tires out over the course of the game, and eventually Alabama will pull away, and then they'll beat Mercer very easily. And then I think what'll be a very tricky game against Oklahoma. Oklahoma's biggest home game in SEC play against a really good passing attack that I think can challenge the secondary. I think a defensive line and linebacker core and actually pretty solid defense that can hold up more against Alabama's rushing attack than either LSU or Missouri, who I thought were best equipped to expose Alabama in the secondary. Tennessee is pretty well equipped as well, but then they have a solid defensive line. But I think Oklahoma will not allow Alabama to completely dominate time of possession. And with their biggest home game of the SEC, I think it's going to be a really tough environment for Alabama. I know they're probably used to that, but still, I think it'll be a tough place to play. I think Jackson Arnold has one of his best games of the year here. I think Alabama drops this game to Oklahoma, but I do think they win the Iron Bowl. I don't think Auburn's a great team this year, certainly not on Alabama's level. I think they're improving, but not this year. Do I think they'll beat Alabama? Although you never know what could happen in the Iron Bowl. But I think Alabama will finish 11-1. I got them headed to the SEC championship. All right, so here are the final standings. We got a three-way tie for first place in the SEC. But because Georgia beat Texas, they have the tiebreaker over Texas, and Alabama beat Georgia, giving them a tiebreaker over Georgia. So Alabama and Georgia will be our SEC championship match. Then you can see the rest of the standings here. All right, so in our SEC title game, we've got Alabama versus Georgia. I predicted in the regular season for Alabama to defeat Georgia with Kalen DeBoer, causing concerns, for the Georgia faithful over can Kirby Smart get over this Alabama hurdle. And I think there's going to be a lot of pressure if he loses this game. Even with the two national titles, I don't think fans are going to be happy. They're going to feel like they're still behind Alabama, even with Nick Saban gone. And that's probably how they feel during the regular season matchup. But I think they can excuse, okay, that one was on the road. This one's a neutral site. A bye week in the college football playoff on the line here. You got to get it done. And I think he does. I think Georgia, slightly better team here. Both teams extremely talented, two most talented in the country, both with good quarterbacks, good O-lines, good running games. I like Georgia's offensive weapons a little more on the perimeter, bringing in London Humphreys, Colby Young, returning Dominic Lovett, and a really good tight end room there as well with Lawson Lucky. Urasech comes in from Stanford. I think they're better than Alabama in terms of that, and I think Beck's a better passer than Milroe on everything except maybe the deep ball. Obviously, he's not as good running the ball, but I think Georgia's defense at this point of the year is clearly one of the best in the country. I think early in the year it's not going to be as good because they're bringing in a lot of new faces, but I think by the end of the year, stars have emerged. Their linebackers are going to be elite the whole year through. Alabama, I think it's a great game. Maybe overtime. I think it's really, really good game against two great teams. Both will be in the 12-team playoff, but I think Georgia wins it. Thank you guys for watching this whole video. I'm going to have full videos on all the Power 4 conferences, as well as a video on the top group of 5 teams to look out for, as well as Notre Dame will be in that video. If any of that interests you, make sure to check it out. And then I'll have a full top 20 end-of-year top 25 prediction that includes my playoff predictions. Thank you guys for watching. Bye.